History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. You see, back in 2020, everyone was asking the same question: are Pokemon cards in a bubble? We saw vintage boxes, vintage booster boxes that were worth a couple of $100 suddenly spike to $4, $5, $6, $10, $20,000 over the course of a few weeks. In fact, even Logan Paul was walking around with a Charizard card on his neck. If that wasn't signaling a potential bubble, I don't know what was. But anyway, fast forward to the present day and people are now asking the same questions. We've seen the huge lines, we've seen the crazy prices, we've seen the fighting and the scalping. So the big question everyone is asking: are Pokemon cards in a bubble again? Well, today we are going to break down that question through the lens of economics. We'll compare the Pokemon boom compared to prior booms such as Tulip Mania, Beanie Babies and the dot-com crash. And together we'll figure out if this market is in a bubble and therefore heading for a massive correction. Welcome to Pokéconomics, a new series that I'm trying out where we explain Pokemon through economics. Cardboard meets capitalism. So stick around and you might learn something new. In 2020, the world shut down. People got bored and started looking for new hobbies. And often people tend to turn to nostalgia to bring back some childhood memories. That is the obvious answer everyone will give you to try explain why Pokemon went through that 2020 boom. But that wasn't the complete picture. You see, back in 2020, governments were on a stimulus package rampage. Now, if you don't know what a stimulus package is, it's a type of policy designed to increase consumer spending to revive the economy. So why were governments doing this? Well, put simply, consumer spending stopped over the course of one night. With lockdowns in place, businesses were struggling. Hospitality, retail, and travel were all at risk of going bankrupt. Unemployment was spiking. People couldn't spend their money. And as a result, the risk of an economic depression was rising rapidly. If we look at the US government alone, the US government pumped trillions of dollars back into the American economy. And one of the obvious ways it did this was the stimulus checks that Trump gave to all US citizens. As a result of these stimulus checks, the fact that people couldn't go out and spend their money, this led to individuals having more cash in the bank than they would have probably expected. And at the same time, central banks such as the Fed began reducing interest rates to almost 0%. That had a double effect. Number one, it made it pointless to hold cash in a bank account because you weren't earning interest on that money. And number two, interest rates determine your debt repayments. If interest rates go down, most likely your mortgage payments go down as well, and mortgages tend to be the bulk of consumer spending. So when you factor in the stimulus checks, the fact that you couldn't leave the house and spend your money, and mortgage payments going down, there was a surplus of cash sitting in a lot of people's bank accounts. As a result, what we saw during COVID is actually stocks went up, excluding travel, retail, hospitality. Crypto went up. You would have seen a lot of Bitcoin moon boys. And as a third result and other impact of all of this excess cash, we saw collectibles go up, not just Pokemon, all types of collectibles. But with Pokemon, it was the perfect combination of nostalgia and scarcity. So what do we actually mean by is there a bubble? What is a bubble? Well, economists defined a bubble as a period where an asset price rises above its intrinsic value, driven by speculation and herd behavior, not fundamentals. But what does that actually mean? Well, we'll take one of the most biggest examples. This is a textbook example when it comes to economics of what a bubble is. Let's throw it back to the Dutch tulip mania of the 1600s. That's right, 400 years ago. You see, back in the 1600s, tulips, yes, the flower tulips, were super rare to Europe, and no one could get enough of tulips more than the Dutch. This was essentially a collectible item for Dutch people. Now, at the peak in 1637, some of the rarest tulip bulbs were selling for 5,000 florins each. That's equivalent to about 65,000 euros in today's money. The rarest tulips even sold for over 10,000 florins. That is over 100,000 euros for a tulip bulb. To put that in perspective, a house in Amsterdam Central Amsterdam on the canal only cost 3,000 florins, way below the average price for a normal tulip bulb. So in other words, you could literally trade a tulip for a house. Now, there were no fundamentals to why tulip bulbs rose as fast as they did. Yes, they were rare, and yes, they were collectible, but should you be able to trade a flower for a house? At that point, you have to question the fundamentals. And at that point, we would say the fundamentals are not matching the value people are paying. As a result, that is your bubble. Now, when it came to tulip mania, everyone thought prices would keep rising. It's a tulip, it's a safe investment. Everyone wants tulips, they're so hard to get. That's what the Dutch people thought, until one day confidence broke and suddenly everyone started panic selling tulips. All this demand was driven by herd behavior. So once confidence reduced, the whole market crashed and tulips became worthless literally overnight. People lost everything, like houses, lifestyle, families were broken. Like, it was pretty crazy. Now, we saw the same pattern with Beanie Babies in the 1990s. These toys were selling for about $5 per beanie, suddenly shot up to 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 for the rare ones overnight. Same cycle, same pattern, and then Beanie Babies crashed. Hopefully you're starting to notice a bit of a pattern, a bit of a cycle that goes like that. And it's the same with stocks, collectibles. It's not just limited to collectibles, to speculative assets. The dot-com crash, these were tech companies that were making no money but attracting billions in investment. There was a misalignment of the intrinsic value and what people were paying. People were paying this, the companies were only worth that. As a result, what did we see? The same cycle of going up and crashing back down. As soon as buyers stop rushing in, that's what we talk about bubble, speculative and herd behavior. As soon as that herd behavior switches, prices crash just as fast as they rose. Pokemon in 2020 looked very similar to these historic bubbles. The media hype, celebrity endorsements, and stories of people becoming overnight millionaires creating Pokemon businesses really fueled herd behavior. It was like a negative feedback loop, a Ferris wheel you can't get off. Prices go up, more people buy in. Prices go up, more people buy in. A non-stop cycle, a never-ending cycle. Let's take the holy grail for many people, a first edition base set Charizard in PSA 10. Before the boom, this was still an expensive card in PSA 10. It was probably averaging around $20,000, but by the height of the frenzy, this card was hitting $300,000, potentially even more. The data's so choppy, it's hard to actually get exact figures on this stuff back in 2020, but a tenfold in price over the course of a year is clearly not right. And that explosive price action is classic bubble behavior. And I really do pin down Logan Paul as one of the big catalysts in this whole frenzy as well. The box breaks he was doing on live stream was pulling in millions of views globally, and it was turning Pokemon from a weird hobby to something that people were viewing as either cool or something to make a lot of money on. And that global exposure is what gave Pokemon that legitimacy. We had collectors pouring in, not from just Japan, not just from the US, not just from Europe, but from a global stage. And that is where the key difference potentially lies here. Tulips and Beanie Babies, they had a small pool of buyers. Pokemon is a decade-long franchise with millions of players, millions of collectors, and potentially one of the highest grossing intellectual properties in the world. So did we actually experience a bubble in 2020? I've spread a lot of doom and gloom about the classic price actions. Prices go up, prices go down, people get burnt. Let's give a bit of optimism here. So to answer it, in 2020, yes, we had a bubble, but not all parts of the market are equal. You see, modern sealed products that were mass printed in huge quantities crashed just as fast as they rose. Hidden Fates is the best example of that. Hidden Fates crashed probably between 50 to 70% after the 2020 bubble pop. But vintage grails, such as base set cards or trophy cards, experienced slightly lower drops and tended to stabilize at a higher low. And why is that? Well, based on my opinion, true collectors were willing to spend tens to hundreds of thousands on vintage product, whereas the scalpers were spending small amounts, $50, $100, $200, maybe even $500 on booster boxes, modern booster boxes. As a result, when that bubble popped, the scalpers left the market faster, which meant a lot of cheaper product, modern product, dropped harder, whereas the older product that was more expensive to begin with had that underlying demand. Those products were sitting with true collectors, not speculative investors. Now this split, this analysis, potentially just personal opinion based on what I've witnessed, is very important because bubbles always hit the speculative areas the hardest, whereas assets, yes, assets in quotation marks because we're still talking about cards here, assets with deep-rooted fundamentals, so nostalgia, rarity, cultural importance, are far more resilient to when the bubble pops. The lesson is clear. When a market is flooded with cheap money, all the shit rises. But when liquidity tightens, once that herd behavior switches, only the strongest assets, the assets with cultural importance and rarity, will be resilient. So fast forward to today. Are we in a bubble? Once again, we're gonna scope out to macroeconomics here. Everyone makes up some bullshit conspiracies. You gotta realize everything tends to be tied to the economy, not just random people on YouTube floating out opinions, although maybe that's what I'm doing, I don't know. But at least I'm trying to use some economics here to provide a bit of base to what's going on. So what's going on with the economy right now? Well, interest rates have been falling and are expected to fall further. That makes borrowing cheaper, puts more cash in people's pockets because mortgage payments go down, and makes saving a bit less attractive. At the same time, younger generations, so Gen Z and millennials, are increasingly getting into investing at a younger age compared to, for example, our baby boomer counterparts. But what's super interesting is this younger generation is treating high-risk assets such as Pokemon cards, crypto, and general collectibles as a safe haven. Now, I don't know why this is happening. I have two theories. Number one is younger generations just don't seem to trust the stock market. And number two, cost of living is so messed up and people are so broke. They're hoping to swing big, hit a home run. Why do they want to spend $10,000 in the stock market and earn $1,000 a year potentially when they could potentially buy a booster box for what, $150? And then pull a $1,000 card? I don't know the answer, and I don't think anyone actually knows the answer to this, but one message is clear. We seem to see a shift, and it is now culture over corporations. And that shift in mindset is fueling the demand we are seeing today. And there's another side to this coin. So I already talked about cost of living being so messed up, people are trying to hit home runs on investment. But the other side to that is people are trying to make more money because they can't afford to live right now. And side hustles are at an all-time high. That 9-to-5 job just doesn't pay the bills anymore. And for some people, flipping Pokemon cards is the perfect way to make that extra income. But again, that creates the negative feedback loop we talked about earlier in the video. As more people treat Pokemon as a profit machine, prices go up, more people drive in, prices go up, more people drive in, and all that happens is more flippers and more speculative investors get drawn into that cycle, which means when that bubble pops, it will pop harder than it has ever done before, because it is the true collectors that will provide the underlying demand, not the flippers, not the scalpers, not the speculative investors. It's the perfect storm to create the bubble. So what's the lesson here? Well, probably the negative message, the lesson here is Pokemon is not special. You have to look at Pokemon just like you would look at any other market in the world. Yes, hype can send prices higher, but nothing lasts forever. Pokemon survived the 2020 crash because it had a long-standing history. Decades of games, TV show, TCG tournaments that kept it alive, but that doesn't mean it's immune from being in a bubble. I will always personally believe Pokemon has a positive future due to that culture over corporations, but you can't get trapped into buying people's shit. Shit rises when there's money in the market, so you need to buy the stuff that isn't shit. Thanks for watching the first episode of Pokéconomics. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for episode 2.